Welcome back to Preacher Handshake. I'm Hannah.
And I'm Evan, and we're your hosts. This episode, we talk with Reverend Aurelia Dávila Pratt, and we look at a sermon she preached at Peace of Christ Church on January 26th, 2025. The sermon is called Wasted Time, and it was based on 1 Corinthians 12.
Reverend Aurelia Dávila Pratt is the lead pastor of Peace of Christ Church, a radically loving community in Round Rock, Texas. Aurelia was named by Sojourners as one of the 10 Christian women shaping the church in 2022. She is the author of A Brown Girl's Epiphany, Reclaim Your Intuition and Step into Your Power, and her writing has been featured in multiple publications. If you'd like to keep up with Aurelia and the work she's doing, check out the links to her Instagram and website in our show notes. So, Evan, why were you excited to have Aurelia on the pod? What was some of your favorite parts of our conversation with her?
Yeah, I was really excited to get to talk to Aurelia. I had heard about her and heard about the work that she was doing. We went to the same seminary, but just kind of missed each other. But I'd gotten to know a lot of people who I really loved and respected, who were often mentioning how much I loved and respected her. So started following her work and hearing her preaching. So I was excited that we could talk to her about her craft and how she approaches preaching. And I loved in the conversation really how her personality, which comes through in her preaching, comes through in her real sense of identity and self and the untangling of some of the negative things that she has maybe inherited from Christian expressions that were less helpful in her development, and how she has navigated untangling them and then being able to express what's more true about both the text and about God and about herself. And I think that all comes out both in her preaching and the conversation.
Yeah, I really loved all of her commentary on that. And there's so much of her message that I'm still processing and that is really still like living in my brain. I love how her preaching style is so kind of non-traditional and it felt very conversational. Like I felt like I was having a conversation with a friend and not sitting there listening to a sermon. And so that was really unique and really fun to talk to her about her preaching style. And then she did this really great thing that I love, where she's talking about her deserving some of these things when we think about like what does self-care maybe look like, or what does it look like to really own this idea that like we're deserving of rest. And that's something that I really struggle to accept. And so getting to talk through that with her was really powerful and something I'm still thinking about often. So I'm so excited for people to hear this.
Yeah, and I would really encourage people to listen to the whole sermon. As always, you can find a link for that in our show notes. Well, I remember, I was listening to many of her sermons as we're navigating. What do we want to talk about? Which one should we pick? And this one really challenged me and helped me as I was trying to navigate the reality that we're in and being a person that's online. So I'd encourage you to check out this sermon in the full version, which you can find in our show notes. And please now enjoy our conversation with Reverend Aurelia Dávila Pratt.
Hello, we are so glad that you're here and that you're joining us for Preacher Handshake. Please tell us a little bit about your congregation. Tell us a little bit about what the work that it is that you do.
Yeah, okay. So I'm the currently the lead pastor at Peace of Christ Church in Round Rock, Texas. I'm also a founding pastor. We started in 2013, so we're about a dozen years old now. And we've evolved a lot over the years, but from the beginning, we've always been a preaching rotation kind of community. And so often the lead pastor will preach the most, but we always have a wide variety of voices. And particularly since the pandemic years, when we moved online for a year or two. At that point, like all our pastors just rotated evenly. And then since then, we have been very intentional in our preaching rotation to have not the same person speaking all the time. And it's just a normal part of our culture. I think if the same person was always preaching, everyone would be very confused. So that's a big marker of our kind of congregation-led collaborative spirit that our community has. Yeah, I really love what we're doing, but I guess I shared a little bit about it in terms of our preaching style.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about, if you don't mind, like your kind of typical people that make up your congregation. Who are they? What are they like?
I would say we're predominantly young families. There are people of all ages, but we're a very small community. You might see 30 adults at a service one Sunday. Then on Easter, of course, there's going to be like more, 50, 60, 70. But if we have 25 adults, we will have 25 kids. It doesn't matter. There's always like a kid to it. There's just so many children. And so it's a very vibrant, active community. We are not a neighborhood church. We're in north of the Austin metro, and so people drive from many different cities to come to our services. We don't own a building. We rent a space in Round Rock, and so people drive from all over the area to come there, and then we try to create other pockets of community all throughout the county, uh, you know, as a part of our normal way of gathering because everybody lives 20, 25 minutes away usually. We also have a very, uh, we have a lot of people who they were done with church, but then they were like, let me just try one more time. And so everybody is very open to doing things differently, we have a lot of innovative, I think, creative ways of moving in our community, and the people in the community are very supportive of that. And so, one thing we do that I think would give a fun idea of who we are is every first Sunday we pause all programming and don't meet at all. We actually started this before the pandemic, so it was not a pandemic thing. It was just we're a small community, we're community led, community funded. We don't have any grants, any financial support outside the people in our community, and not a wealthy congregation either. So no rich aunties or anything like that giving us money. So we're very like, I guess, grassroots feeling in a way and how we operate. And we just wanted to acknowledge that everyone's all hands on deck and we get tired and we have lots of young kids with activities. And so once a month we pause. And then, yeah, we do a house church kind of thing once a month as well. And so we actually only gather in the traditional way twice a month on the second and fourth Sundays, plus Easter and the first Sunday of Advent.
Something we like to ask everybody is, what's your relationship to preaching? Something that you've always loved, something you discovered, something that's a highlight, or something you feel like you just have to do?
Yeah, I love preaching. I love the art of it. I love like the different elements that make up the preaching moment and how it's kind of different from other ways of speaking. I was always a person who loved and communicating, and I was a speech major in undergrad. I always felt comfortable as a public speaker, and in fact, I feel like I'm a stronger speaker than I am writer. Some people feel maybe stronger with the writing and then they do the speaking, and I'm kind of the opposite. I feel like I bring things to life more when I speak them, and I love that about the preaching moment. When I was in seminary, I just took a preaching class because I had to. I think I probably had some imposter syndrome, and that was kind of what made me think that I didn't really have permission to do any more than that with preaching. I did come from a background, first Catholicism growing up, and then in college, I moved into the Southern Baptist tradition, and so I did not feel empowered to explore preaching. So I took the required class. It was my very last, like one of my, I think it was toward the very end. I put it off. And I loved it, but it was the only class I took. I did, I mean, it's kind of a funny story, but I ended up winning the preaching award for my class from that one sermon. And I called the school when they emailed me because like, I think three or four people get that award. And I called the school to let them know they accidentally attached me to this email. So I was like, there is no way I just won this award. But it was just such a gift because, again, like struggling with that imposter syndrome, it gave me kind of the empowerment that I needed to feel like it's okay. Like I'm allowed to do this, and also I might be good at it. And so when I was starting this church, I was originally just coming on as a pastor who was doing more like formation stuff, associate type stuff. And they asked me, they saw on my resume that award. I mean, I put it on my resume and they were like, "Hey, would you join the preaching rotation?" I mean, I've literally preached 2 times ever. So it's just an interesting mix of random, but also like not wanting to downplay that I did have an inclination for, the preaching part of being a pastor.
Oh, I love that. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's such a cool story. I imagine that having that kind of like dichotomy of being in the SBC for a minute and then also having this experience with preaching. Something that I also was like trying to navigate as a young preacher. So it's really cool that you were affirmed maybe in subtle ways that have played out, it seems like, in your life since then. So
Yeah.
would you tell us a little bit about what your sermon prep process looks like in a typical week for you?
Yeah, I mean, I try to listen to my intuition and like what does it require of me this week? But overall, I think my process is that I start with Lectio Divina. I usually read we follow the lectionary in our community. It's not required if you're preaching, but most people do, and I always do. I love the rhythm of the liturgical calendar, and so I'll follow the lectionary, I'll take the text, I'll read through all the texts and then decide based on, which one resonates and stirs something within me. Sometimes I'll use all the texts, but I'll always have a primary. And I'll write it down on paper and I'll do a Lectio Divina. I'll read it and then I'll have silence and I'll do that. And then after the silence, I'll jot down any notes and I'll do that 3 times. And then oftentimes I will use those notes and because I'm more of a speaker and I'm more of an external processor, I will actually pull up my voice notes app and I will, looking at all my notes, I'll pretend like I'm giving a sermon off the cuff with those notes. And then that usually our sermons are usually 15 to 18 minutes. Usually that will produce like a 12-minute recording. I'll then transcribe that onto my computer, and then I'll go through the process of looking up, using my commentaries to supplement, making sure like, I'm providing what needs to be provided by way of exegesis. I used to do this differently, by the way, where I'd start with exegesis first, but there's many reasons why I changed that process. And I'm sure we can get into that with more guiding questions, I guess. But yeah, that's kind of the process for me. And I do use manuscript preaching. I've a few times done outlines, but just the seminary that I went to, the experience I had, and the church we've created were mostly manuscripts.
Yeah, thanks for sharing.
It's such an interesting and beautiful process. And it's so embodied. Like I'm hearing, so you write by hand this text. And
Yeah,
I've done that before, just like as like a spiritual practice. And it just brings to life the text in ways like,
yeah.
it's so
It
interesting.
forces you to slow down too, in a way, because we can obviously type so much faster. Um, I can be very wordy, and so I find that using a notebook and I use a pencil before I ever get to my computer helps me really like refine what I really want to say, because my hand will get tired. Like I'm not gonna, the most important thoughts are gonna come down into the paper. And that helps me anyway as a kind of a long-winded type.
So we are looking at a sermon today that you preached on January 26th called Wasted Time. And before we kind of get into the meat of that, I wanted to ask a question about something that you mentioned kind of a third of the way through, where you're talking about this series of epiphanies, which is the sermon series that you are in this. And you've mentioned it a little bit before about the collaboration that your church really gets into, but it seems like this series is also a way you're demonstrating collaboration. So I'd like to listen to that and then ask a question about your process.
We're in week 3 of our annual Epiphany preaching series. We always do this time of year. It's a favorite of mine because we get to hear of so many different from so many voices in our community, which is so important, right? So I love particularly the personal nature of the series. I love hearing people's stories and lessons. At the same time, I tend to find that when it's my own turn to preach, this series is one of the hardest because I can't really share any personal epiphanies without being vulnerable.
So I love that this is a practice that your church does. And I love how you're honest about when the subject matter is really coming from you of like, what are the epiphanies I can share? That seems like such a vulnerable process, but I imagine so valuable for people to hear those voices. So I'm curious, would you tell us a little bit about how that practice came about, where you're doing a series of epiphanies every year, and why you think that hearing from those other voices is really important?
When we first started the church, even though we were a rotation, we didn't use preaching series. We only used the lectionary. And then about 5 years in, we decided to try series, and I had a little resistance because I didn't want to lose the feel of the lectionary, but we actually still use it. But anyways, the series just kind of helped us create an energy around what was going on in the community when we can, share. Also, we can use the series to be really specific to the needs of our own community. So the lectionary really reflects the church universal, but our own community has specific needs, and the series helps us attend to those needs through the preaching moment. And so for the last 7 or 8 years, we as a team come together and we brainstorm the preaching series to come up. So I think it was 2019. I can't remember what year it was, but I think it was 2019 when we just came up with the Epiphany series because of those collaboration moments. It is the season of Epiphany, and if you follow the lectionary, that's an ordinary time. So there's not really Lent kind of gives you stronger prompts. Advent gives you like exact themes for each week. Ordinary time can be very long. It is long. It's the longest part. It's the longest, takes up most of the calendar. And so for Epiphany, we were just trying to decide what we wanted to do there. And we decided wouldn't it be fun to just share personal epiphanies we've had? And at, we have different pastors now. We have, we're multivocational community. And so people have transitioned off and others have come on, but we've just continued to do the series because we enjoyed it as preachers. It's not going to be an exegesis heavy series. It's going to be more personal, more quote unquote testimony style. But I think people enjoy that. I think people really resonate and learn. At least I do. I love hearing. I always like perk up when I hear someone start to tell a story from the pulpit, a personal story, because I don't know. It's interesting to me. And so vulnerability can be a superpower. I don't think that we would want to do something like that all year long because it's not always relevant. Like sharing about yourself is not always what's needed. But once a year, it's nice. And again, we always have different people. We try to do a different person every week in that series. I think I did twice this last time, but everyone else, there was one person. So anyway, yeah, that's how it got started. But fun fact, actually, my very first sermon for that series was called A Brown Girl's Epiphany. And then that went on to be the name of my first book. So I have a book out there called A Brown Girl's Epiphany, which you wouldn't know this through reading it, but it's actually like my canon, and each chapter is based on like a sermon that I've done before. So you would never know that reading it, but I actually pulled from all like my old sermons to construct chapters. And anyways, that came from that series, turned into a book. So,
Cool. So in this one, you begin with this quote, and I want to play that.
So imagine there's a country that doesn't have a government, a king, a queen, or a president. There's nobody around to take care of the country. The country needs a government. It's the same with ourselves. We need to be present in our territory, to take care of it, because our territory is large. It includes our body, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness. We need to be the king or queen and govern our territory. We need to know what is precious and beautiful so we can protect it. We need to know what things aren't so beautiful so we can fix and transform them. As kings and queens, we need to become aware of our responsibility to see that we need to be the sovereign, to return to our territory and take care of it. Thich Nhat Hanh, peace activist and Buddhist monk, by the way, he passed in 2022, talks about the self here, using this metaphor of territory needing governance, which is to say, attention and care. And indeed, here's what I am learning. And I believe it's a lifelong kind of lesson that will require lifelong practice. I am learning to take care of both my bodies, my body, my territory, and the body, so beautifully described in today's reading.
So much to unpack there, but I want
Mhm.
to start just by asking about the quote. And I love that you're bringing in this interfaith element to your preaching, demonstrating the things that we are learning can learn from other faith communities and faith expressions. Why do you think it's important to expose your congregation to these voices? And why is interfaith elements helpful?
Should
Mhm.
we have a theological discussion?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, I, it's I don't even really think of it that way because I think that in our community we've really tried to take, you know, knock down the walls around the box that we put up around our faith, our idea of what's holy, what's sacred. We really, interfaith is normal for us. We used to do weekly interfaith gatherings for the first 5, 6 years of our community's existence, and then have had a long relationship with the Interfaith Action of Central Texas here in Austin. And so that's always been a part of our community and normalized to have interfaith relationships and to appreciate other faith traditions, especially because when we did those interfaith gatherings, what we learned was that every single speaker that came in, whether Hindu, Buddhist, Jewish, whatever tradition they might have been from, Muslim, they were all able to quote the Bible. They were all able to say, here's what inspired me about Jesus. And none of us knew anything about their faith. And that felt very interesting to me. And so, widening our idea of how God shows up and how, not just in other faith traditions, but just in our everyday lives. And so, the idea of quotidian is something that has been very, very, very important to me for many years. And so, we like, just like we'll quote someone in a sermon, we'll also do like we have this whole small group series called Music Movies Books, and we intentionally pick non-religious music, movies, and books to explore because we don't want to compartmentalize our faith. We want every moment to be, this embodied moment where we understand, and experience our Imago Dei and the reality of, how faith and God and divine show up all around us, and especially including, widening the circle of faith texts and, you know, not being afraid or threatened by that.
It's so enriching. And I think I'm hearing that part of it is, the communication speaks into that, but so much of it must have come out of that proximity and intentional work. And then it's natural that it just becomes part of your language because you're living it. And I just think that's a great example and so helpful.
So you kind of tease this thing at the end of the clip we just listened to, where you're thinking about two bodies, and you use that image and that language kind of throughout, where you're thinking of your body and the body, and how both of those deserve good things. One of my favorite things I think that you say throughout this is, I believe this full, overflowing cup is our sovereign right and our responsibility. So let's listen to the clip where you say that, and talk a little bit about this idea of the two bodies.
And I am learning that I cannot offer much to the body if my own territory, my own self, is neglected. I believe that our internal thriving is crucial to any sustainable contributions we can make in the world, which means, for me, I must do things like daily face my own thoughts and feelings, my own healing. I must do things like daily listen to my body's cues and then give it what it needs. These things require my attention. And so, in order to care for myself, I need fuel. I need energy. What's more, the investment of prioritizing this care is worthy because when I'm well rested, when I'm joyful and hopeful, when I am well, I am able to function as a part of the body, capital B, in ways I didn't even think possible. I am able to show up in this world with things like clarity and creativity in tow, and I am able to move throughout my days with deeper purpose because I am more in touch with the ways in which, as Frederick Buechner once put it, my deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. My body and the body. Again, greeting each day this way requires fuel, energy, a full cup. And here's the thing, I believe I deserve this. And I believe the same for you, image bearer, child of God. I believe this full and flowing cup is our sovereign right and responsibility.
Yeah, so like I said, you said that, like, I believe that this is our sovereign right and our responsibility. And for me, it was kind of just like this breath of fresh air, in a way that I see it being not just profound and powerful, but also kind of subversive in the way that you're talking about what our right is and the things that are part of human flourishing and a good life. And it really, in a lot of ways, to me, seems subversive to this, like, we are scum of the earth and can do nothing good kind of theology that sometimes we take on or is handed to us, maybe. So I'm curious, how did you come to this idea of the two bodies language and the saying, this is our right? And why was it important in this message for you to kind of begin with that idea?
Yes, if you listen to all my sermons, they all say the same thing, which is Imago Dei. That's the central theological belief that's underpins everything I talk about. And in fact, I'm sure I say it in that sermon. There's probably not a sermon where I don't say the words Imago Dei. It just drives everything I say to the point where I do feel like I'm just saying the same thing over and over. And I'm like, oh, this is so boring. They're like, again. But that's what it's about. And I think that's contrary to some of the evangelical frameworks we inherited, which told us we were bad and told us, we can't be trusted. Our hearts are deceitful. Well, who do we trust then? Well, we trust God. Well, who interprets what God's saying? Like, okay, the Bible, like who's deciding what the right interpretation is? Oh, okay, a spiritual leader who's a human, whose heart is supposedly also deceitful. It's like, this doesn't actually work for me. But what does work for me and what I think that we all have within us is that, we're made in God's image and God's spirit lives within us and we're inherently good and we can trust ourselves. We can trust the voice within us. And I think that we've been taught from a very young age to be disconnected to that voice within us and to distrust it. And so, people go to church and they want prescriptions. They want a fill in the blank of what to do and how to proceed. And I think that's not helpful. I think we, as preachers and pastors, we need to be equipping people to do their own work and to listen to spirit within them. And we can come alongside them and we can offer guidance and help, just as we need guidance and help. But I'm suspicious of anyone who's giving out blueprints. And I think that I think that overall the church is very powerful, and that there's a lot of mass manipulation that goes on and has gone on and continues to go on, because you can use that mass manipulation to tell people what God is saying and what God is doing. And that's what I see happening a lot. And so I think we need to be empowering people with Imago Dei, and I preach about it every single time I preach.
It is like a preaching adage that you really just have one sermon and that you
Yes,
just say
mine's
that
Imago
same
Dei.
thing. Yeah. Uh,
Yeah.
and one of the things I loved about how you help people with that, because sometimes the language can be maybe feel a little too abstract, or, okay, what does that mean for me? How do you help people do that work? I loved how you connected it to that famous Buechner quote of
Yeah.
our deep gladness in the world's deep hunger, because it gave it this like, oh, yeah, this part of me is good, and that my gladness is good. I've struggled with undoing some of the things that I've inherited to be able to accept that. Um, I, I want to ask, over your tenure pastoring in this congregation, how have you seen your congregation grasp that vocation that they have of God's good work in the world coming out of their deep gladness? How have you helped them discover the reality of Imago Dei? How have you seen it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it is, and what's so beautiful about it is that at this point, it's just automatic for, everybody knows what Imago Dei is. Everybody knows what it means. Everybody, like, it's really cool, because it's like, I can see that, yes, we're undoing, but Imago Dei is very empowering. And so for me, pastoring a church that is filled with people who are either deconstructing or have already deconstructed, that can be really hard and heavy work, as a pastor, because everyone around you is wanting to burn everything down. And I've also, as a small church that I helped start, I've seen this trajectory where I've realized how much I have to like know what I believe and what, the church is there for, or else it just kind of becomes this club where people are have friends, which is awesome. But I feel like the church goes deeper than friendship. Like it's the community, sacred community plays a function that is different and deeper than friendship. And so anyway, when you know what the community is about, and for me, at the core of that is Imago Dei, you can be steady when a lot of people around you are going through the fire and are burning some stuff down and throwing some things out. And I think Imago Dei provides a soft place to land. So what I see in my community is that people don't stay in faith crisis. Like going through deconstruction is going through faith crisis. And Imago Dei has provided a place for people to land and for people to still have a rich faith, and to have a faith that provides spiritual resources that help them in their everyday lives, so that they're not. A lot of us were tethered to shame and guilt. That was the tool of faith. And so now people have these other tethers, which are like, goodness and hopefulness and peace, and other spiritual resources that I think Imago Dei provides. And those resources are what get us through life. I mean, they are. So whatever they're doing in their lives, whatever their jobs are, like having that tether to that good thing within them is helping them. And it's kind of like this oxygen mask
That's so
in these
helpful, so rich. And so you identify the oxygen mask, and then next in your sermon, you're going to talk about this leak that you notice in your own life.
times.
So let's listen to that.
In all of this, I've been taking notice of ways that I tend to waste my own time. I'm not necessarily talking about indulgence, frivolity, or play, or fun. I'm not even talking about laziness or open space or times of doing nothing. And I'm not suggesting that I or we should always be productive, whatever that necessarily means. What I mean, at least today, by wasted time is using our time in such a way that drains us of the resources we need to be well in the here and now. So for me, wasted time is anything that unnecessarily and perpetually drains me of things like hope and joy, of that inner energy that fills my cup. And like I mentioned earlier, in 2024, I discovered a slow leak, gradual but significant. One of the areas where I feel like I have truly wasted a lot of time is on social media. And I'm not even talking about the mindless scrolling, although I'm certain I've already lost years of my life to that, unfortunately. I'm speaking specifically to my own attempts to get people who disagree with me to somehow start agreeing with me based on the posts that I share on social media. Lots of time wasted, I fear. And listen, there's nuance here. And there's always going to be nuance.
So around the time that you preached this was around the time I listened to it. And I had recently had a conversation with my partner about social media, and I've found myself in the same kind of situation because it's 2025 and you preached this on January 26th. Like there was so much like to be despairing about and caught up in and trying to change people's minds about. So I had, after this conversation, I deleted the apps from my phone. I built some new rhythms. But I've been trying to navigate how to talk about these kind of healthier practices in preaching. Because at some level, I don't want to be like the old man yelling at the cloud. At the other level, I don't want to ignore the nuance of like the value of digital community and what that means for so many people. Um, so I wanted to ask you, as you were sharing your own epiphany, how that response has been, and just affirm you as a fellow like terminally online person that it was really helpful for me to hear you express it and talk about this leak. But how has your community responded to it, and maybe how did you decide to run with this idea?
It was the Epiphany series, and it was, I actually, it was a really hard sermon for me because I had a whole nother sermon in my back pocket. It was the Epiphany series. So I already had another sermon. And then that week was the week that it was. And I realized like, no, like this isn't, I have to, this is what's now coming up. So luckily I had one more sermon date in that series. So I still got to use it, the other one, but I put the other one aside, and I really struggled with this one because of just what you said. Like there is a lot of value in social media. And I talk about in the sermon, naming some of the ways it has been really important and is really important. And I didn't want, I was so afraid of being misunderstood, which is crazy because my community is so accepting. Like nobody ever complains about anything. And so it should be fine. But I was just so worried that people were going to like think that I was checking out or like just opting out, which is a privilege. And that's not really what I was trying to say in the sermon, but I was worried about that. So I wrestled with it all week. I actually, to this day, have never finished a sermon so close to when I preached it. I was late to church like by an hour, which I've never like it was just I did not I it wasn't finished. I couldn't it was I was wrestling with it, and I just felt like it was so vulnerable. So it was just yeah, I was late, and I didn't get to review it. It was a rough draft. I didn't get to like, tweak it. And yeah, I was just so tired. I didn't sleep at all. It was like, it's so dumb because, well, I guess now maybe more people hear it, but it's such a small community. Not that many people are going to hear it. We all know each other, but I really, I don't usually agonize to that level. But yeah, that was kind of the behind the scenes of how I ended up with that sermon.
And it's sometimes that way where like those ones that you agonize over are also some that have the most resonance and most connection to
Yeah.
what the Spirit
Yeah.
is
Oh,
doing,
yes. Yeah. So many people. I mean, I've been around 13 years. I preach probably the most. And so I get the least amount of feedback, right? Like
Mhm.
I'm just the automatic voice there. So, people are nice, but I don't get a lot of feedback one way or the other. But I had so many people come up to me and be like, I really needed to hear that. So sometimes I think in preaching, we want to speak to as many people as possible, And some weeks, we're really just not meant to try and do that. We're meant to just give the message we've received. And it's going to be very specific, but like the people who need it really, really need it. And I think that was the surrender for me that week was I'm always trying to like speak to every person and I know everyone too. So it's like I kind of am good at that. And I knew that week that I wouldn't be. I would just be speaking to the people that needed it, but it was, I think, needed for those.
Yeah, and I think sometimes in preaching too, we're preaching to ourselves almost as much or as more than we're preaching to anyone else.
Yeah.
And I feel like I could hear that so much in some of the ways that it was so obvious that you were dealing with this and you were wrestling with this. Obviously, like social media has changed the way we do everything in life. And it's kind of this like relationship we're always kind of drawing on and going back to. But I love that you handled it so well and were willing to just change the way that it needed to go because that was what needed to be said in the moment. You also brought up this really interesting part, how talk sometimes is outweighing the doing, especially when we're culturally people who are chronically online, and how we talk a lot, but it's really outweighing maybe some of the work that we're doing, and these one-way conversations are really replacing actions. So let's listen to a clip where you talk about that, and specifically the way that it relates to caring for the body, as you're talking about in this sermon.
For me personally, this is a reevaluation of a strategy that isn't working very well these days. And it's a realization that a huge source of my own lack of energy is not just the state of the world, but the constant conversation about the state of the world. Around the clock, no boundaries, no breaks, no rest. One-way conversations are outpacing the actions needed to care for the body. Talk is outweighing the doing, the movement, the tangible acts of creating change. There has to be another way.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit more about why you felt like this commentary on the talking versus the doing and the tension there was necessary, especially since, you've already acknowledged that talking can and does have an impact, and we've seen that. But why was it important to bring up kind of that dichotomy? What was the significance of that?
Yeah, I just think over the years, my experience as a pastor, sort of surveying the landscape of the situation collectively, is especially in a progressive, increasingly progressive Christian context, because I don't know that we were necessarily in that when we were birthed as a church, but the landscape of all that has evolved very quickly and a lot. And what I've just seen is just a lot of not taking care of ourselves so that we can actually do sustainable work forever. It's like, but rather people just like running on E and then they have nothing left. And um, I feel like that was what this whole sermon was about, is that we're not using our time smartly, like so that we can do sustainable heaven on earth work for the rest of our lives. And so when I see so many people posting, and I see a direct correlation of hopelessness and despair, I have to wonder, like, is this helpful for sustainable heaven on earth work? Because it's not, like I said in the sermon, like, what's the end goal when you share a post? Like, just reevaluate. Maybe it is worth sharing. But like, if you're not thinking about it and you're just constantly sharing, constantly talking, but you're also exhausting yourself in the process, how is anything real, like doing practice, going to happen? Because you're exhausted. We are exhausted. Um, and so I think that was really what that was about, is just like, we're we're talking a lot on social media. And the worst part about it is like long ago we all kind of set up who we wanted to listen to, unfollowed the people that annoyed us. So who are you talking to? Like they're not reading your post. Like, and so I'm not saying don't ever post, don't ever share. I still share. It's just maybe maybe reset your boundaries, reset your relationship because social media came upon us hard and fast. And I don't know that many of us have reevaluated enough as it's changed. So, yeah, less talking there so that we have the energy to actually put some of our beliefs into action in real life. And we can still use it. We can still use it for all the good that it can do, but it just feels like a really intense overflow of information all the time.
Yeah, and I think sometimes, I fall into this trap of like constantly being in this mode of talking and then realizing that like there's such value in me honestly just shutting up and listening. And I think when we're in this conversation of like talking and doing, there's like a real aspect of listening to one another that's lost when we're just talking at each other. And so I really appreciated this point of being able to do the work more honestly, more generously. One of the things that's really interesting to me about this message, in particular, is that it's really not your typical evangelical 3 points in a poem, or even, some of like the Haddon Robinson big idea type of preaching. It's very conversational. It relies really heavily on your personal experience. Listening to it kind of feels more like I'm having a conversation with a friend. Um, you're not exegeting things line by line, and you already shared a little bit about how your process is kind of like flipped in that way, where you're starting maybe from your own experience. So it sounds like this is pretty typical of your preaching style. But I'm just curious, like, how did you develop that as a method for doing it, especially since it sounds like the training maybe that you have in this is something that is a little more structured in some ways. But I'm really curious. I really love the way that you did this. So tell us how you developed your preaching style.
Yeah. So the first thing I did was, well, not the first thing, but one of the most important things I ever did was put away the commentaries for a while. So this agony that I experienced with this last sermon was frustrating for me because I've gotten away from that. But for many years, every time I preached, it was like that. And maybe like 5 or 6 years ago, I wrote an article about how I don't remember the name of it, and I think it's behind a paywall, so it's pointless. But like basically, I had this discovery um, that every single time I stepped up to the preaching moment, the preaching process moment, I was having to one at a time untangle myself from these cords of indoctrination that were binding me as a woman of color, just being in a progressive context. There were all these cords that even though I said, I don't believe that anymore, I believe women can preach, I believe this and that. Like, even though I said that, these cords were still like wrapped around me and binding me. And so every time I had to step up to preach and to write a sermon, I would go through this agonizing process of having to unpeel all of those, which was kind of an it was a kind of emotional turmoil to go through that. But once I realized, oh, here's this chord of women can't preach, like once I realized that those existed, I could just that awareness, as they say, was the medicine. I could literally be free. I gotta find that article one day. And what did I say? But anyways, so that was a really important moment for me. And after that, I realized that I really needed to put away the commentaries because the part of me that did not trust my own spirit within me, my own intuition that I think is spirit speaking into your life, I didn't have access to that because I was using the commentaries. And it's fine to use commentaries, but it can, I think, make for a really boring sermon if your whole sermon just sounds like a repeated exegesis of other people's voices. I don't think it's helpful for the community. I think it's boring to hear a communicator do it that way. That's for me. There's no room for creativity. And so I needed to step away from that. Also, all the commentaries I'd ever read were like white men. So like I was angry about that. So it was a healing process for me to just put them away and force myself to lean into whatever my own voice would say. And I often talk about the Wesleyan quadrilateral, and we learned about that in seminary, but you know, it's frustrating for me because it's like we have reason, tradition, scripture, and experience, and it's supposed to be like this balanced thing, but experience actually like totally gets the boot and is not respected. But what's interesting about that is that reason is going to be kind of monopolized by who? Like the voices in academia. Who are they primarily? And then tradition. Who are they? And then scripture. Well, that's interpreted based on reason and tradition. And so the only part of that quadrilateral that might make room for marginalized voices gets rejected. And
Mm.
so for me, it is an act of resistance to bring that back in to the conversation. And sometimes I very intentionally leave out leave out the commentary process because I think that it's important that all of us know that we have the ability. Now, I know that I'm equipped and that I know how to have that process. And I know when I have the tools to look up dates and to look up to make sure I'm like respecting, the reality of the text and its context. So I do think I still treat it with a reverence. But yeah, I think that all of that was a part of kind of the way I developed the way that I preach, which is very intuitive, creative, and I would also say poetic. There's a cadence. I love spoken word and writing spoken word. And I think if you listen to my sermons, you'll often catch moments where I'm like, it's almost like a spoken word was inserted into the sermon a little bit. And so just having the freedom to play like that is a big part of my process too.
It all comes through. And yeah, it's really beautiful. I love what you brought to your reflections on the quadrilateral. And I mean, that's just helpful. I wonder too, like you mentioned at the beginning of like even in seminary, there was this like imposter syndrome. And like personally, I sometimes like lean on the quotes and the tradition or whatever because it's like, well, I don't have anything to say, and to be able to release that
Yeah.
and realize that your voice is worth something and you don't have to
Yeah.
rely on these other voices. I think that's so powerful and helpful.
You get more feedback. That's what
Oh, for
I've learned.
sure.
I get more feedback on the weeks I was vulnerable, on the weeks that I shared something real, than on the weeks that I like quoted, or like, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I wanted to ask this as well because you've mentioned about your community and how there is a team of preachers,
Mhm.
and also there's been a handing off of, and I know there's things coming up in your life too, and I'd love to hear a little bit about that and that process and how um, pastoral leadership is kind of handled in this community that you've helped create.
When we first started the church, it was Kyle and I. Kyle and I started as the founding pastors. Kyle's the lead pastor, Kyle Tubbs. I was the pastor of spiritual formation, but then we had other preaching pastors at that time, who just were a part of the preaching rotation. And so we always shared that rotation, but also just the style of how our leadership is set up. It's all very congregational led. And so when Kyle left, it was really scary at like for me, because that was like my partner in crime for 5 years. But it was really beautiful to see like no one batted an eye. We kept on. We did not take a hit in terms of um, this dynamic leader who was truly amazing, like is gone now. And yes, that's hard, but because of the way we function, the work continues. And so that was the beginning of something I think we leaned even more deeply into over the years. The next couple of pastors that came on, there were three of us. Matthew and Fran. Matthew was also a founder, but anyways, the point is like we had a 5 year moment together, and we really split the preaching. And then we also liked to bring in people in our community because there's so many people who are clergy or seminary, went to seminary, or what. We just have so many people who were pastors or at least went to seminary or something like that. And so we would invite them to preach. And so at that point, it was just like the expectation. So after Matthew and Fran transitioned on, and who both still continued coming, but like, moved on to other things in their professional lives, we brought in from our own community, we called them creative preaching pastors. And so they were in the rotation, they were paid when they preached, and their only job was to be a part of that, keeping that part, that rotation going in the collaborative process of creating the series and vision and all of that. And then now we have a few more pastors who are here, who one of those preaching pastors is now just on the regular staff. If you know Kendall Rothis, she joined our staff. And so she's preaching, but we just have a lot of preachers in the community. We're so lucky. And, we just invite people in to preach. And so I'm actually getting ready to roll off of staff. I think it was our trunk or treat. We were having a church potluck last fall, and I was sitting at the table, and there were like 6 other people around me. And I realized they were all former pastors at our church. And I was just like, wow, I'm at the alumni table. I was like, I want to take a turn and just like move into other ways of being, whatever is next. I don't actually know what's next. I think I have a sabbatical ahead of me that I need to take and get some rest. So that's what I'm going to do when I step down at the end of May. But yeah, I still feel the same energy in terms of call, in terms of just being a person of God in this world, of creating heaven on earth. But it's just sort of like it just feels like, in our community, we've taught ourselves listen to spirit, listen to those nudges and follow them. And so I feel like that's what I'm doing. And for some reason, it's not really, it's just a liminal space kind of thing. But I feel at peace. The community's going to be great and everyone's supportive. So yeah.
Just think the future of this collaborative preaching out of not just one person's personality, but a personality of a community, I think there's so much value and richness there. And it's just really encouraging to hear what you're doing, and I'm excited to see what that looks like next for you after the
Yeah.
sabbatical. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks.
As we kind of wrap up our thoughts on sermon and preaching in general, what are you most proud of about this particular sermon?
That's a good question. It's funny because when I was going up to give it, I was like, this is terrible. It's a rough draft, all that. But there's, about this, the preaching moment. It's just so different from anything else for me because I do speak in other ways. I do feel like it's a spirit moment. That it brings it to life when you speak it out loud. And there's a moment where, and there's an energy. And so after, on the other side of that sermon, I was like, wow, that's one of my favorite sermons that I actually ever wrote. So I think what I'm proud of about it is that you chose it because I'm just excited it gets to have like a little bit more life,
Mm.
Like it has that little moment. And I thought it had a good mix of personal, but the personal was actually helpful. Like, don't share personal anecdotes, but like share story if it makes sense, is relevant and helpful to what the community needs. So I
Mm.
thought that the personal was helpful. I thought that it met the community where they are right now. I loved the my body and the body and the way I use the text, which is a text what we've looked at that text every year. I mean, it's we use that text all the time. And so it's like it was exciting to see a new way to tell that story of that text. And yeah, I think it brushed up on the current events in a way that was hopefully relevant. So
Yeah, I love that. I think One of my most memorable sermons is also one of those where it was like you found out the day before you had to preach, and I lost my notes and things were not going well, and I was like stressed about it. And then looking back on it, I think those are the moments, like as a preacher, that I look back and say, oh, yeah, like this is the Holy Spirit the whole way. And how dumb am I to think sometimes that like that's not a part of this because it's so obvious in those moments. And yeah, it's beautiful, and I can tell that this one really meant a lot to you. So, if you could do anything differently in this sermon, is there anything you would do differently?
I would probably just go back and edit the first draft. Like I always, but I've that's how I feel about all my sermons. Like they're not perfected. Like they're ne we never have enough time on them. So with this sermon and with any of my sermons, I would just say like if given more time, I could tweak it and probably make it better. But it came alive in the moment that it was needed, and I think overall it was fine.
Our final question is, why do you think preaching matters today?
Yeah. I mean, I think it of course depends on who you ask. You're asking me. I as progressive as I may be, and if you visit our community, I mean, there's a lot of range, but I consider myself Christian. I don't consider myself post-Christian. I see a lot of churches and people, and that's fine. But I'm actually I've made peace with the Christian label. I do think that I am trying to be a little Christ, and that, I like that way of framing the Christian label. And so for me, the preaching moment is still one that I hold dearly because of its, dedication to the text. It's really important to breathe new life into these texts while still honoring the reality of where they were situated. And I think that texts can really get misused and used as weapons. But the preaching moment in my context is really important because we're not allowing that to be the only way to engage a text. And so it's really important to me to continue the preaching moment, not just a speaking moment or a teaching moment, but like the preaching moment where we engage a text and we, have some kind of exegetical moment where we're looking at the text in this way to create this moment that is a communal moment. And of course, it's different if you're guest preaching somewhere, but when you have the honor to preach to a community who and who you're doing life with, there's just something really, really helpful about that, you know, depending on how long, 15, 20-minute window where everyone's sitting together receiving this one moment. It's not the central moment of our services. Our central moment is communion, but it is really, really important. And I think especially with so many people like burning down so much, hopefully this sermon moment is a moment of building and reimagining and finding hope.
Well, thank you so much for sharing this sermon and your time with us. We really appreciate it, and we're so excited to hear about the work your church is doing and to see what you do next. So, thank you.
We hope you enjoyed our conversation with Reverend Aurelia Dávila Pratt. If you'd like to listen to Aurelia's full sermon or keep up with the work that she's doing, you can follow her through all the links posted in the show notes. And if you like this episode, please share, subscribe, tell your friends. If you have questions for us or recommendations for guests, email us at preacherhandshake@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. See you in 2 weeks.